So welcome everyone to our third session of the day on Dyslexia Show Virtual Workplace number 2. This is with Hayley from Cambridge Fire and Rescue. Really looking forward to this talk. Of course, a big thank you to all of our speakers, Michael Vinesh, Neil Milligan, Adrian, Hayley, Lauren, Darren, Jonathan and Mary. We're really looking forward to all of these speakers over the day. As I said, you will get the recordings of these after the sessions are finished. Of course, me and Hayley were just talking about this and using QR codes. If you want to scan the QR code there for upgrading your free ticket to the CPD certificate. I should really put the price on there. It is £29 plus VAT. That covers the cost of all the CPD for all the sessions. Thank you very much to Dyslexia Box for their support and their sponsorship of the Workplace Zone and our lead sponsor, Claro Software. And of course, to all of our other sponsors that are sponsoring the Dyslexia Show as an organisation. So thank you to Nessie Scanning Pens, Fairley House, St David's College, Unique Ability Consulting, SEN Legal, and of course then the supporters, the BDA, Study with Dyslexia, SEN Books, Helen Arkell, Recite Me, English Type, London Grid for Learning, Special Direct, Touch Type Reading Spell, Patos, and of course the SEND group. Just going to check now the chat box, the question box. So I'm just reading that. So I think that's a question for Hayley later, so I'll answer that later. Of course, there you go. There's all the information. If you want to scan the QR code to join our LinkedIn group, would love you to do that. If you want to, I'm going to leave that on there for 30 more seconds, and then I'll come off to the next slide. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Follow us on Facebook. That use the hashtags. If you're using the hashtags, take a picture of your slide that you're listening to. Love to have that. So it's really good if we can do that. So excellent to see that. So don't forget that all participants are in listen-only mode. The webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions, put them in the question box, and there will be the Q&A afterwards. So I'm going to unmute Hayley. Hayley, can we still hear you, or can I still hear you? Can we all still hear you?
Good afternoon, Aaron. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly fine. That's brilliant. That's good. So I'm now just going to swap over to your screen. You want to click on Share My Screen for me? That's great. I can see your screen, and then if you just click on your slide, then you'll be able to move forward. So I'm going to hand over to Hayley to talk about great minds don't always think alike, which is one of the comments we've just made with each other. So over to you, Hayley, for this afternoon session.
Thanks very much, Aaron. Good afternoon, everybody. Like Aaron said, my name's Hayley Brackley. I currently now work at Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Service in Learning and Development. And I'm here to talk to you about why great minds don't always think alike, but why that doesn't mean that they're any less great. So when I talk, I always say I'm going to start at the beginning, because actually, as a neuro-minority person, I recognise that the beginning is a very good place to start. And also, I think it's really important that we take a very holistic approach when we're talking to people with neurodiverse conditions. So I'll move through, and a couple of things might come clearer to you as I move through, so bear with it. But if you do have any burning questions, then I'd love to hear them at the end. For me, when I started school, I was the child with extreme amounts of energy. I was very, very small. I was an August baby, so I was also very young. And I started off at a village religious school where the headmaster said to my mum, I'm not sure that she's going to make her way through this first day of school. Maybe you should pick her up at lunchtime. And my mum said, oh, we'll see how she gets on. You give me a ring at lunchtime, and if you want me to pick her up, or if she's flagging, I'll come and pick her up. And at lunchtime, the headmaster rang her and said, I think you'd better pick her up. And my mum said, oh, is she flagging? And the headmaster said, no, there's just one or two things that we need to talk to you about. And it turns out that sort of climbing across the tables and standing on chairs wasn't really what they were hoping for in this very small, very young child starting at their village school. And I guess that was really the moment where it became apparent to everybody that I was a little bit more of a bundle of energy than perhaps some of my counterparts were. So as I moved through primary school, generally every single parents' evening and every single school report that I had back would say Hayley could do amazing things if she applied herself. Or it might say, when Hayley is pulled to tasks, she'll accomplish a lot, but pulling her to those tasks is very difficult. And this was something that I grew up with and started to feel that actually I was just a really lazy person. I just was a child that didn't put the effort in, because that was what I was told regularly. And that wasn't a particularly nice way to feel like your potential is there, but you're not reaching it, and you're not really sure how to reach it. So then I moved into secondary school. I had a fantastic teacher. I had a few not so fantastic teachers, but one of my teachers was amazing, and she really went for what today we would know as that person-centric approach. Now, obviously back then, it was just somebody that was maybe a bit airy-fairy and not so strong on the discipline as other people were. But this secondary school teacher, she really tried to see the best in me. And what happened one day was I was in her class, and unfortunately I'd failed. You can't fail, they say, but I had failed my SATs tests. And so where I should have come away with sort of 6s and 7s, I came away with 3s and 4s. And that meant that I ended up in a bottom set group. And this teacher took the bottom set English class. And you can imagine, for a child who could do great things, sometimes being in a bottom set English class was incredibly boring. So one day I decided that I would liven it up. And in my school bag, I had a can of hair mousse. And I thought, you know, this would be a really good idea, is just to squirt the hair mousse around the classroom. Because, you know, why would you not think that that's a really good idea? And she sat down with me afterwards, and I was mortified. You know, I wasn't an unkind child. And she asked me why I did it. And I just said, I don't know, it just kind of happened. And I hadn't really thought about it until the point that it had happened. And I'm ever so sorry. And she said to me, I'm not going to discipline you for this, and I'm not going to punish you for this, but I would really like to speak to your parents. Now, my childhood, because I'd been this kind of different child and a little bit harder to get along and understand, I'd spent quite a bit of time with counsellors and child mental health services. And it was only when this teacher said, I'd like to just explore the background a little bit more, that child mental health services recognised that there was a diagnosis there of ADHD. Now, this was in 2002, and ADHD was only adopted by NICE a couple of years previously to this. So as you can imagine, it was really new. There was not a lot of information. There wasn't the internet to have, you know, wealth of information and things you could Google on it. So it was a very strange diagnosis, to be honest. It didn't really feel like it answered a great deal of questions, but what it did do is give me access to some accommodations. So what happened was I was prescribed meth, methylphenidate, otherwise known as Ritalin, and I also had accommodations where I sat my exams in different rooms, and I'd have one-to-one support for various things that would just help me to get on task and concentrate. And it was amazing. I went from being the child that failed the non-failable tests to actually achieving A's and A stars at GCSE, which was something that throughout my school history everybody had said was achievable, but nobody quite knew how to get me to achieve it. So I finished up school, and for one reason or another, I ended up living on my own at the age of 16. And now this is another thing to understand about neurominorities, is that often family situations for their childhood aren't particularly standard, and that this adds to that kind of baggage. So you've got somebody who's grown up being different, grown up feeling different, grown up being told that either they're not good enough or they don't conform well enough, And then you add to that with potentially an unconventional family life. So being on my own at 16 meant that I then moved into the world of employment, and I was no longer in school. Now this meant that I no longer was entitled to access child mental health services, and could no longer access the medication that I was given. And they said to me, this isn't really a problem, Hayley, this is all right, because you grow out of ADHD, it's a childhood thing. And I'd also received a dyslexia diagnosis while at school, and that just wasn't really mentioned. It was like, well, dyslexia is only really something that you need to know about when you need those accommodations in exams. It's not something that affects you daily, obviously. It's just about 25% extra time, we all know that. And so I moved into the world of work, and I got a job with a housing benefit office. And it was a very interesting recruitment process that I did pretty well at, because it was very kind of one-to-one. There was lots of people asking you questions, keeping you on task. And they did a 7-day trial, but the 7-day trial was done with people around you. So you were kept on task, which for an ADHD mind is brilliant, because, you know, that accountability is absolutely gold. What then happened was I got the job, and I went into the job, and I found myself on one desk of about 45 desks in a really big open plan office. Now my desk was in front of the manager's office, so there was always people coming in and out past my desk. You know, how are you doing? What are you up to? And I'll be honest with you, it kind of meant that I was pretty useless at that job, because the biggest thing that we recognise from ADHD is that it causes concentration difficulties. And when you do a job where you need to concentrate, you need to have the right environment to be able to concentrate. So what I did, not realising that, you know, this was ADHD at the time, because of course I was 16, I was thus a grown-up and had therefore outgrown this childhood condition. So I decided that I would just put my earphones in, because that worked really well for me. It blocked out all of the noise and I could focus on my job. And unfortunately, back then, just as I didn't recognise it, nobody else around me recognised the importance of me using earphones for concentration. And I ended up on a disciplinary for continuing to use my earphones. And, you know, this obviously wasn't a particularly nice way to feel. And just that open plan mind, where literally everything can filter in and out of it, didn't work in this open plan office. My accuracy was poor, my concentration was poor, and then it turned to a point where my efficacy was really poor as well. I no longer believed that I could do it. And that wasn't a very nice place to be, if I'm honest. Nobody wants to be in a role where they feel like they're not doing a good enough job. So I moved on. I secured a role within the emergency services, and I started working shifts. And these shifts were amazing. They were an absolute game changer, because all of a sudden it wasn't in a massive open plan office. There was lots of adrenaline, and adrenaline works really well for the ADHD mind, because it focuses it. It gives it a chance to concentrate on what it's doing, which is absolutely perfect. So I worked these shifts, and I worked with people who were very visual people. There was less wordy writing. You know, that worked really well for me, again, being dyslexic. And I started to feel like I was really kind of surrounded by peers where I fitted in, and it was lovely. It was really cathartic, just a really positive experience. Then what happened was I had my second child. So obviously I'd had the first one first, then had the second child. And all of a sudden I was no longer feeling like I was fitting into this shift system. And I was no longer feeling like I fitted into employment, but I also didn't feel like I fitted into this motherhood role. I found it really challenging. It was constantly feeling that same sense of failure that I'd felt throughout my childhood and my teenage years, where I just couldn't do things that other people could do. So, you know, people would turn up with a changing bag that was well stocked, and I would turn up and go, oh, I forgot to put the nappies in the changing bag. Has anybody got a size 4 nappy that I can have, please? And it makes you feel really inadequate, and actually it makes you feel like you can't appreciate the things that you are really good at. So the person that's able to engage a room full of toddlers, and the person that's able to read the emotion in the other mum's faces, and the person that's able to create a conversation with just about anybody in a mum and baby group, and the person that's got the energy to just plough through, even though they've been up all night with the baby, they can be out with the toddler. I didn't realise any of that at the time. All I realised was I was the person that just forgot everything, and I was pretty rubbish and not good enough as a mother. And this caused me issues when I was in the workplace. When I came back from maternity leave, I found that I had real struggles. And I started to realise that actually this is that thing that they told me I had when I was a kid. This is that ADHD thing, isn't it? And I started to do a bit of Googling, and I found myself in a couple of Facebook groups that were for mums with ADHD. And all of a sudden I was like, I'm not a failure, I'm just a little bit different. And that was just amazing to feel that. So I approached my manager at the time and I said, I'm really struggling at work, and I think the issue is my ADHD and my dyslexia. It just feels like everything's got a bit overwhelming and I'm not sure where to start on things. And what happened was she rolled her eyes at me, and she wasn't interested at all, and she was just like, oh, well, so what, you know, there's nothing I can do about that. And so I went away and things started to get a bit messy for me. I felt worse and worse. I felt like my parenting skills were declining. I also felt like my skills as an employee were declining. It wasn't pleasant. Once again, I'd reached a point where I was feeling like a failure. Now, for people with ADHD, one of the key pieces of research has been into how does that look in the brain. And it's generally thought of to be a dysregulation of brain chemicals, and in particular dopamine. You might have heard of dopamine as the sort of the hit chemical. So it's the one that makes you feel good. It's the one that can cause addiction, because, you know, you get addicted to that hit. So imagine that your dopamine levels are already dysregulated, and then you're feeling really grotty about things because you're being unsupported in the workplace, you feel like you're a failure, and then you start to do things which give you that hit. Now, I know from peers with ADHD that often at this point in people's lives, it can be the point where they unfortunately fall into substance abuse, alcohol abuse, other unhealthy addictions, self-harm. All of these have the same effect. It, you know, it raises your dopamine levels momentarily, but you need the hit again next time. Now, for me, what it meant was I became addicted to being around other people. So being with friends, just, you know, being with them actually gave me that dopamine hit. But it reached the point where if I didn't see somebody in a day, I would feel distraught, and it would be awful. And actually, if you'd have seen me at that point, it probably looked quite a lot like bipolar, because when I was with you, I was perfectly happy. And when I was away from you, I was miserable. I was bordering on suicide. And the reason I'm sharing this is because for individuals with neurodivergent thinking, this depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts is massively, massively increased. And when you're thinking about employees in your workplace and why it is so important to support them, morally, if we think about, would we want to help somebody avoid that despair and that absolute desperate mental health suffering? Well, of course we would. We wouldn't want to put somebody there if we don't have to, would we? We wouldn't want to put somebody there even if we felt there was no other choice. But you can only understand that if somebody tells you about it. That's why I'm telling you about it. What happened next for me was the relationship in my work broke down. It broke down to the point where I was completely off the rails. I felt awful, and actually ended up being bullied by the manager that I'd asked for support from, which I now understand, you know, the kind of magnitude of that legally. You know, bullying somebody with a protected characteristic has that legal magnitude. But actually, I don't feel like organisations should be having to consider what's our legal stance on this, because actually it's what's the right stance on this. Do we want to push people to the point of mental breakdown through bullying? No, we don't. We want to support people and get the best out of them, because otherwise, why are we employing them? So I reached mental health crisis, and I went to see a therapist, fantastic therapist, and about on the 4th session, she said to me, "It's just something I want to say to you. I get the feeling that you want to be fixed, but I can't fix you. You're not broken." And I was like, oh, all right. Well, that's an interesting one. I am broken. You know, my mind doesn't work properly. I'd really like my mind to work better. And she said, no, you're not broken. You're just different. And it got me thinking. And I'm not saying that that was the magic one that made me feel so much better immediately. But what it did do is make me think about being different and the fact that maybe that isn't broken. And so I started to really research ADHD and dyslexia and how that impacts on executive function, how it impacts on your perceptions of the world, and how it impacts on you as an individual, both through the condition you've got, but also how that's meant you've had to live your life. And it kind of led me to this new journey, I suppose, of understanding my diagnosis as an adult, but also understanding more about neurodiversion. And that got me to thinking about the whole world, turned it on its head. So I started to think about, you know, good kids sit still. We all know that, don't we? And good employees are really compliant. And we all fit a mold. So, you know, you have an organisation where you have somebody at the top, and that person at the top designs an assessment process to be able to bring in more people. And because they've designed it, it's going to bring in more people that are like them. And that's great, because then we're all the same and there's no issues there, is there? But actually, do we want everybody to be the same? Do we want to live in a world where everybody just fits the same mold and everybody thinks the same and everybody acts the same? And do good kids sit still? You know, where do we place our measure of what is compassion? How do we measure that in schools? When we've got a child who can't sit in their seat but is running around because they want to help other people, or because they want to entertain other people, or because they want other people to feel happy, is that a bad thing? I would suggest it's not. I would suggest that actually our desire for conformity is the thing that makes us judge things as bad. But when we can take away our views on what we want people to conform to, we realise that there's so many more attributes to judge on. And also, do we really want to judge at all? So I started to really think about this whole square peg in a round hole feeling. And I noticed that as you look around you, the people who, when I was at school, were either the bad kids or the geeks, are now either the entrepreneurs or the architects. You know, those people who were the geeks that kept their faces in a computer are now the people who might not have amazing conversation skills, but their computer programming skills are second to none, you know. And actually, if we don't embrace that difference, how are we going to move forward? And that's not just as individuals or as organisations, but as a society in general. If we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we always had. If we don't view people as individuals with that person-centric approach, we're going to force people into being dead wood, because they're not going to be able to offer their best, and therefore they are going to fall into this dead wood category. So that then leads me on to the fact that I'm disabled. Now, if you saw me, you wouldn't think I'm disabled. I'm disabled because I have ADHD, and I'm disabled because I have dyslexia. I'm not sure that I am disabled, and I started to look into the social model of disability. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to imagine that you are going into a kitchen, and it's a very normal kitchen. It's probably the kitchen that you've got in your home right now. You've got a larder fridge with the cheese on about the middle shelf of the top half of the fridge. You've got drawers with your cutlery in. You've got wall cupboards with your plates in. And you've got a bread bin on the side, on the worktop. And you are in a wheelchair. So you go into that kitchen with everything at the same levels that you would have used this morning, standing up. But you're now in a wheelchair, so your chin is about the same height as your worktop. You obviously can't reach things in the way you could. Are you able to make a cheese sandwich? I would suggest no. I would suggest that because you are confined to that wheelchair, you're no longer able to make that cheese sandwich. Now, I want you to imagine that you go into an environment where everything is placed at an appropriate height for you. So whilst you're still sat in that wheelchair, everything is at chest height. So you can reach everything. And things adjust so that, you know, if you want the worktop a bit lower, you can have it a bit lower. Are you now able to make a cheese sandwich? I would suggest yes. Now, it's kind of the same for ADHD. I was able to process those benefit claims when I was in quite a small environment with other people talking through how we were going to do it. When I was put into a large open plan office, all of a sudden I was disabled. Now, I wasn't disabled because I had changed. I was disabled by the environment. And I say that with an emphasis on the disabled. I feel like my ability was taken off me by the environment I was put in. Now, that environment wasn't actually necessary to get the job done. To enable myself again, I put earphones in. I was then disabled by having the earphones taken back out. So the environment can be changed really easily to be a disabling or an enabling environment. And for me, that's what stops me being a disabled person, is the environment that's around me. So in my role now, I have a job that enables me. You know, I no longer work for somebody that's unwilling to talk about my ADHD or my dyslexia. I have the flexibility to work the hours that my brain is going to work best for me. And, you know, these aren't big changes. They're just the small things that enable me. When you start to think about that and you start to remove this from the ability and stop people being disabled, we reach a point where, what do we call it? Is it a learning difficulty? Well, actually, no. Is it a learning difficulty, or is it a teaching difficulty? Is it that the way something's being taught or the way something's being explained isn't going in. So is it that person's learning difficulty, or is it that person's learning teaching difficulty? So then you reach the point of, is it diversity? Is that person a neurodiverse person? Well, diversity is everybody, and all of us will be neurologically diverse from each other. So again, no, I'm not sure that it even sits as that. Are we all just different? Yeah, actually we are. We're all just different. We've all got different minds, different brains, different ways of thinking of things. And we don't need to make people disabled. We don't need to point out the conditions that make somebody part of a particular diverse area of our society. We just need to accept uniqueness and individuality. They're just characteristics. And this becomes even more prevalent when we do talk about neurodiversity, because I know that for a diagnosis of dyslexia, you can approach a educational psychologist, and an educational psychologist can go through that with you. For a diagnosis of ADHD or autism, generally you're going to have to go through the medical world. So you're going to have to go via your GP, who may or may not have an understanding of these conditions. You're then going to have to hope that in the county that you live, this is a funded resource. You're then going to have to hope that you can get a place on the waiting list, and that your place on the waiting list comes through at the right time. You're also going to have to hope that you were referred to the right specialist, because it's not a holistic assessment. You'll be assessed for different things by different people. And if nobody referred you to be assessed for autism, you won't be assessed for it. On the flip side, there's often a lot of comorbidities, and you just might tick one box short of a diagnosis on something. But actually that doesn't mean that you struggle any more or any less than Pete, who did manage to tick that box and does have that diagnosis. Pete's made up, by the way. So, left-handedness, we used to think that that was a disorder, didn't we? We used to, well, possibly some of the people on this group are too young to remember that, thankfully, but it used to be something that was beaten out of children. You shouldn't be left-handed, you should use your right hand. And actually now we've come to accept that people can use their left hand to write or their right hand to write, and that's absolutely fine. They still write. Sometimes there might be differences in handwriting from it, but at the end of the day, they can both achieve the goal of writing. And actually, you've got about the same percentage chance of being left-handed as you have being dyslexic. So when we think of those people that are just a bit different because they're left-handed, well, actually, there are also people who are just a bit different because they're dyslexic. And that's not in any way to belittle the struggles that dyslexic people face, or that people with ADHD face, or any other condition. But it's about the inclusion of them. We wouldn't exclude an area of people from our organisation because they use their left hand to write. And we should make sure that what we're doing doesn't exclude people because they're dyslexic. So that leads me on to risk takers and policymakers. It's about the best person for the best role. It's all very well saying we're going to include people and we're going to be absolutely inclusive, but if you've got somebody whose dyslexia means that numbers jump around on the page, and with all of the adjustments in place, they still jump around on the page, it's probably not going to be a best fit for them to be your accountant. Just as if you've got somebody with ADHD, they're pretty good at taking risks and calculating risk quickly, but they might not necessarily be the best person for concentrating on writing all of that down into a policy. So if you can get people to work together and work to their strengths, and this isn't just about people with dyslexia, people with ADHD, this is about everybody, every employee working to their strengths and working together, then you're going to get the best out of people. And one of the things that I've heard loads recently with this current pandemic that's going on is that in employment, we need to take that person-centric, strengths-based approach. And I think for people who are neurominorities, that couldn't be more true. You know, it's absolutely paramount that people feel that they can bring their whole self to work, but their best self to work. They don't have to hide a part of them, but that they can really flourish by using their skills. So that leads me to adjustments and accommodations. Now, don't think about singling somebody out for an adjustment. That's not the way to go. The Equality Act would have us believe that, you know, we need to do that. But actually, if we can have an environment whereby everybody can have that one-to-one conversation, regardless of whether they've got a protected characteristic or not, everybody can have a conversation that says, this is what I could do to do my job better. Wouldn't that be a better place to be? You're reducing the stigma for those who are disabled, who do have a protected characteristic, from saying, you know, I need something a bit different. But also what you're doing is you're not making those people the disabled people. You're having an organisation where the approach is person-centred. It is about, let's get the best out of every single person that works for us. Now, you know, I read a management magazine article that said that the good adjustments for ADHD were, don't sit that person next to the printer because it's noisy. Don't sit that person under a flickering light because it's distracting. Don't sit that person next to an entrance or an exit because, again, it's distracting. Give that person access to regular one-to-ones. And this is where I say, let's not single people out. Because if I imagine that all of you that are listening don't have ADHD, and I do have ADHD, or you don't have dyslexia, and I do have dyslexia, only I am entitled to a desk that's away from the printer, that's away from the flashing light, that's away from being right next to the door. Now, how does that make you guys feel? Would you like to be sat next to a noisy printer? Would you like to be sat under a flickering light? I'm guessing that nobody would. And that's part and parcel of having a good workplace, you know, an outstanding workplace where people have access to one-to-ones, they have access to conversations, and they have access to a manager where they can say, my desk's right next to the noisy printer and I find it really difficult to do my work. Is there anything that can be done about that? And the manager says, yeah, let's look at whether we can soundproof around the printer or move it somewhere else. Wouldn't that be a nicer place to work than somebody having to pull out their trump card and say, I'm disabled, can you change this for me, please? So for me, I definitely feel like I'm the right person in the right place now. I work in learning development. My role is around helping individuals grow. My role is around, you know, getting people to understand their own strengths, what's limited them previously, what they're working towards. It's about giving people that chance for those coaching questions of, you know, what can you bring? How do you bring that? What does good look like to you? And I think that when we talk about accommodations, that's the biggest thing, is about, let's make sure that everybody's got the opportunity to that conversation. And, you know, when I say to people, I'm the right person in the right place now and life feels good, I'm not cured of ADHD, I'm not cured of dyslexia. I still have days where, you know, I'll read something and I'll think, I really wish those letters would stay still. Or I'll turn up to a webinar and somebody will have used a white background and the words are just jumbling all over the place. Or I'll have a day where it feels like my brain is just full of treacle, and as much as I try and concentrate, it's not there, it's not happening for me. I've tried medication again as an adult and it doesn't work for me. It's there's a lot of side effects, and actually the benefits didn't outweigh those side effects. So there are still struggles, and the struggles aren't just around the struggles that you would think a diagnosis of ADHD or dyslexia would give you. there's also those struggles around, do people judge me for this? Do people think, just stop being so lazy? You know, do people think, why does she do that differently? All of those things. And I'm not sure whether that's due to the diagnosis or whether that's due to the fact that grew up in a generation where it wasn't really accepted to be different. So I think the best thing that we can all do for ourselves and for each other is to move forward with acceptance for each other. So I'm coming to the end now. I'm hoping that you're all still with me and that I haven't sent you all to sleep. That's my goal. So I just, you know, if anybody's got any questions that they want to ask me, I'm more than happy to answer them. I'm very open. There's nothing that you could probably ask that, you know, would feel uncomfortable to me that hasn't been asked before. So, you know, if you've got any questions, please fire away. I'd love to hear them.
Hayley, you know, that was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much for it. I was like, just like gripped on a lot of things you were saying. It's brilliant there. So Hayley's QR code, we've got, me and her have had this thing about QR code. I've had a thing about QR codes today. So add Hayley to LinkedIn if you want to. I don't know, my LinkedIn app isn't working on my phone, so if it, you can always take a photograph and then do it. So some really good questions. Did you still find that the medication like Ritalin still helps you now?
So I touched on that just at the end. For me personally, I found it didn't. One of the big side effects that I think affects everybody but didn't seem to when I was a child was that it affects your appetite. And I think perhaps when you're a child and you're eating routinely with others, that's not so much of an issue. As an adult, I went on it and I lost a stone in about 6 weeks, and it just didn't work for me. Like the benefits there didn't outweigh the difficulties that then come, because even though it affects your appetite, it doesn't affect the feeling of being hangry.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
the best way I can describe it is, imagine, you know, when you're really hungover and you just can't face eating anything. Imagine that, but also feeling hungry at the same time.
I can totally understand that. Yeah.
It's just not a great way to be. So,
no.
And I think the thing with medication is that it does feel like an end goal. Like, you know, you get your diagnosis to be medicated. And interestingly, I felt like I'd failed because the medication didn't work for me.
Yeah, no, I can totally understand that. I can do. So this person is more of a comment. It says there, "Wow, what an amazing lady! To overcome all of them barriers as faced, and we only just got into slide 2." So that came in quite early. That did. Such a shame that attitudes in many schools have not changed in the last 20 years, because it's still not integral. Not integral. It's still not initial teacher training to have dyslexia that is followed through every primary school, which is so true. We still do not have dyslexia awareness in it's not mandatory to have teacher training. Some universities do it when they do tech training, but it's not good. So this person says here, have you used Access to Work to help with some of your ADHD and dyslexia at all?
I've looked into Access to Work. I haven't used it because down to the rulings of Access to Work, if you work for an organisation of a certain size, there's a threshold
for
the funding. And whilst I have used an ADHD coach, it actually wasn't worth going for Access to Work to access it because of that threshold.
Yeah, no.
So I've used the recommendation, but I've not used Access.
No, I think that's the thing. The thing about for me is that without Access to Work, for my dyslexia, I couldn't be doing what I'm doing today, because that support worker is there to support me. Paula is my support worker, and it's been an amazing journey that we've been on for the last, she worked for me when I worked at the BDA, and that's right. It is Access to Work is an amazing tool, an amazing feature, but then it does come down to the organisation's support as well, doesn't it? Like you say. So someone says, "Thank you for sharing this. It's amazing." Have you ever been managed over the last couple of months during lock? I'm sorry. How have you managed over the last couple of months during the lockdown, having ADHD, being a mum, and staying positive?
So one thing that I didn't point out when I was talking was that when I reached that mental health crisis, I changed employer. So I just point that out. I'm no longer working for the same employer where I experienced that negativity. And I'm really happy with where I work now. I work for Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue, and they're amazing. So I'm really lucky in that I have a line manager who will take the time to have those one-to-ones with me, which has been that's been a massive part of how I've managed. I've found it really challenging. Part of ADHD is that you will focus on the things that excite you and interest you. And what excites me and interests me is people. And I've been stuck in my house.
Yeah.
So, like the kind of moving to webinars, they're great and they serve a brilliant purpose, but they're absolutely not the same as being able to be in a room and go and chat with people and all of those things. So I have found it really, really difficult.
Yeah, I know the
and
feeling.
one of the kind of unspoken things around ADHD is something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And I didn't really talk about that today because I reckon I could fill an hour on just that alone. But what I think I will do is put something up on LinkedIn. So if you add me on LinkedIn, then you'll see something on there, and I'll talk a bit more about on there. But rejection sensitivity dysphoria is basically something that's linked with ADHD, but not always comorbid, and it makes people more sensitive to rejection. Basically, they perceive it harder, but also it hurts them more when they get it. And I found that that's been the biggest struggle with being at home, is that you don't have those little check-ins with people that make you feel like everything's all right, and so you can feel it's almost just kind of social anxiety, like everybody thinks I'm doing it wrong, and that's been a big challenge during lockdown because of the lack of interaction with people.
Yeah, no, I can see that.
The final thing is around, you touched on the question asker touched on being a mum and working. So the first 4 weeks I tried really hard to homeschool and work in the same room at the same time, and then I was like, this isn't working. It's not working for anybody. Nobody's getting the best out of anybody right now. And I suppose it's kind of like putting those reasonable adjustments in for yourself. So
that's right. I think
you just have to be really pragmatic and also quite kind.
Someone said here, excellent presentation, and Alice says teaching definitely differentiated. That's definitely true. You approach the specialist assessor tutors for diagnosis for SPD. Also, SASC or BDA have a full list of assessors. It's very true that I know you mentioned the assessment point of view, and I think that's very true. It's definitely an interesting point. I always say, I've had this question asked to me before when people are in the workplace, do they need a full diagnostic assessment? And I say, what's it for? Because it's a quite hard thing to go through. We know.
Yeah.
It is.
And the thing is, sorry, I've interrupted you.
No, don't carry on. It's fine. I was going to read the next question. So you carry on.
ADHD. It's impulsive ADHD. You have to really manage that, as well as throwing hair moves around classrooms.
Yeah.
But the other thing with a diagnosis is that you don't have to actually have a diagnosis to be protected by the Equality Act. So in terms of reasonable adjustments, somebody doesn't have to go through all of those hoops and rigmaroles, or be one of the lucky few where their NHS trust are brilliant and on board with it, to be able to access workplace adjustment.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
I think that's forgotten.
Yeah, it is very interesting there. Thank you, Hayley. Really insightful. Would love to be able to share this with other people within their workforce. built in for new employers getting 100% funding. I think this is linked back to access to work. This is access to work built in for 100% funding. You must apply within the first 6 weeks of your start date. Yeah, that's right to that person, but there is a threshold cut off for the number of employees working for the organisation for access to work. So it's 249 employees. If you have more than 249 employees, access to work, don't fund it. It goes down a tier for every number. There's different percentages. So this person says, I worked for Nottinghamshire Learning and Development and would love to work together in the future. That was absolutely fabulous presentation. This slide, the slides wanting to be fixed and told that not broken completely is reasonable. With me, as I thought the same as was told at the same time. I loved your comments on everything, having access to everything, and your story and managed where in a wheelchair. You are completely inspiring. I hope, and I am so happy that you are in a good job and your life has turned around for the better. Thank you for telling us an amazing story. That's amazing.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
What a comment.
It's also good that to that person I know has been to a webinar before and wrote me a really long thing to read out, which is always good. Personal circumstance approach, important to and able to understand people. That's so true. Thank you so much for this experience. All of the experiences are so interesting to hear about how it affects your life. You how you have developed and overcome many barriers. I worry about my daughter, who especially I worry about my daughter and this is where Clara will need to help me. 1 second. Right, there is a lot on this one. Hold on 1 sec. Oh, and I've turned it off, of course. Oh no, I haven't. There it is. There. I just need to turn it off. Need to turn on my computer so I can hear it. Where's it gone? Oh, let's see. I worry about my daughter and experience of real issues with her. In her very first year at school, she when she didn't conform with how her teacher wanted her. She was couldn't sit still, fiddled with her hair clips all the time. Excitable and always keen to move on to the next thing, distraction by her classmates, etc. Her teachers told us from her frustration because she was more than capable but couldn't be bothered. She was removed from the class as an example to other children about bad behavior, not doing what she was told. That year was impactful on her confidence, her self-belief, and she now feels that she can't do anything, so has become scared to try. That is just like, you just have to want to cry when you hear things like that. And I've heard it before. Did you hear all that? You hear all that, Hayley? I think actually, I always say to people, and I don't know if what you think of this, is listening to our stories of what we've done and how we've done it, and being able to. The one thing about the person who's wrote that, you've listened to Hayley's story. You may have heard bits of my story as well. I would say to you is listen again to the recording and play the bits that you feel that she can listen to. There's always bits of everyone's story that may not be suitable for young people, but I would definitely say that is one way of getting people and showing people they're not alone. I will mention this to everyone. This is the third time we've run Dyslexia Show virtual, and we did it over 3 days for all 3 sectors, so education, parents and workplace, back in May. And in the very last session, I burst into tears of nearly. I was laughing so much because of what a parent said, of how much that her son was listening to me. Her son was next to her. She was listening to all the webinars, and then I read the questions. As most of you now know that I'm severely dyslexic as well. I I find it difficult to sometimes read some of the questions, and she was saying how he was finding that he found that so inspiring, and that kind of moves things forward for me. Um, I'm just looking at the questions. I'm looking at the time as well. We've got about 2 minutes. There's a lot. There's a few more questions that have come in. A few more comments. So I'm just going to read this one. Do you have any methods that you use within your organisation to help identify the needs of specific adjustments to enable working comfortably and more effectively?
So we do, but nothing that I can like package up really easily. However, what I would say, if I'm allowed to do this, is to have a look at a company called Genius Within.
Yeah.
So they will do. They've got a screener tool basically that's really good, and it doesn't rely on a diagnosis, but it brings up, you know, what can you do practically to help people. So yeah, I would get in contact. The chap that I've spoke to there is called Royston Collins, and yeah, I would recommend that.
Yeah, Nancy, who is their CEO, also has ADHD.
Yes.
And when you ever listen to her speak, she's amazing. So
the lady who said about her child, I don't know if the child's got a diagnosis, but what I would say is point out to her people like Nancy, because actually it's all around self-limiting beliefs, and that's what this exclusion through school does for you. It self-limits your beliefs. But when you look at somebody like Nancy and think, oh my word, I could be like that person, it's really, really powerful. So I definitely say that Nancy's a really good person for a child, particularly a girl with ADHD, to have as an inspirational model.
That's fine. I know it's definitely true. So I'm going to say thank you to you, Hayley. Right, there's still lots of people saying thank you. There's a few more questions there. If you want to drop me an email to hello@dyslexiashow.co.uk, I can always pass any comments on to Hayley. I want to thank everyone for taking part. Thank you, Hayley, for an amazing session. Inspiring as it is, I'm really looking forward to the rest of these 2 days. Like I said, the next session is Jonathan Rouse, who's going to be talking from Olympus. Really looking forward to that. And then we also then have tomorrow morning from 10 a.m. Our first talk is from Neil Milligan, and then also Michael Vinesh is at 1 p.m. as well. So we've got some really inspirational talks and also real personal talks here of what people are going through. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for listening. Thanks to everyone that's saying thank you. Excellent presentation. Someone just said again. So I'm going to end the session now because we're coming up to 2 o'clock. We'll see you back at 2:30 for the next session. So thank you everyone for listening. Take care, Hayley. Thank you very much. And I'll speak to everyone again soon. Thank you very much. Cheers. I'm going to end the session now. Bye-bye. Take care. Bye.